Seb, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being with us.
It is my pleasure, Sean. Glad to be back.
So I want to talk about what's going on with this strike on the Venezuelan drug boat. A lot of people were shocked by this. Some people, including fellow Republicans, have expressed outrage. Explain what the threat was against our country. That's what you do. That's what you monitor. What threat did this pose?
Well, very simply, a dire threat, and the exigent circumstances regarding that threat justified the action taken, and I can guarantee you it will not be the last such action. When I had my national show on Newsmax, I dedicated a whole program to the issue of the cartels, and I just decided to do the math, and I added it all up. Since the end of hostilities in World War II to the present day, we've had 103,000 servicemen and women killed in action. So that's Korea, Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, Gulf War, Gulf War, GWAT, Afghanistan. So in 7 decades, 103,000 killed in action. During the Biden administration's open border policies, I went to the CDC website and I found the data. It is well buried, but I found it. In one 12-month period of the open borders of the Biden-Harris regime, 110,000 Americans were killed by drug poisoning, mostly fentanyl. So that's the justification, that more Americans were killed by the cartels in 1 year than Americans killed in 70 years of war. They declared war on us. And to quote my immediate boss, the acting National Security Advisor, Secretary Rubio, who said this just a few days ago at a bilateral in the hemisphere, he said, "We tried the interdiction for decades. It never worked. They put a 2% margin into the cartel business model and they just wrote it off. So now we're not going to do interdictions. We're going to blow you up. That's why we're doing what we're doing."
So you kind of mentioned at the front end that this isn't the last time. Is this the new way of thinking that if you're running drugs into this country, we'll take you out?
So we are interested in two things: destroying the cartels and the gangs that we've designated as FTOs. And before that, if we can change behavior patterns, that's just as good. One of my government colleagues said recently on television as well, the president reinforced it. I think you're going to think twice about getting into that speedboat with a ton of fentanyl on it. So if they stop bringing poison to America, that's a win.
So you said FTO, that's Foreign Terrorist Organization. And by that declaration, is that what you guys are using as the justification for taking them out?
Yes, also exigent circumstances and the national security emergency that was predicated with the open borders. So just the numbers of tens of millions of illegals led into this country, the drug deaths, all of those are the justification for the president to use his powers as commander-in-chief to protect Americans from the cartels, who are now technically, as you noted, foreign terrorist organizations as well.
All right, guys, I hate to interrupt this conversation, but if you're loving the Sean Spicer Show, maybe you want something to snack on, join me in getting a great snack in masa chips. These things are unbelievable. No seed oils, just 3 ingredients. And I'm telling you, they've got a ton of great flavors. Original, blue, lime, habanero. Oh, it's amazing. Every one of them is great. You can dip them. They're amazing. Go to masachips.com/Sean, S-E-A-N, masachips.com/Sean. Use code word Sean, spelled the right way, S-E-A-N, to get 25% off. All right, back to this great conversation. And remember, if you're watching the Sean Spicer Show, the official chip, masachips.com/Sean, code word Sean. So there is, I know, some concern, whether it's justified or not, I want you to respond to it, about what could potentially happen if another country uses this as the justification for taking out, an American ship. So like, for example, in the South China Sea, the Chinese claim all sorts of stuff is theirs, which it's not. But if they were to say, well, the U.S. set a precedent by taking out a threat that they saw in exigent circumstances that existed according to them, why can't we now take out people who are threatening Chinese territory, or at least territory that we claim as ours?
If a nation with a representative government, not a communist dictatorship like China, perceives a threat to its citizens because a non-state actor is smuggling enough poison into their country to kill tens of thousands of their citizens, if they took action and they're an ally and partner, I don't see the problem with that. U.S. naval vessels don't carry tons of fentanyl to be smuggled into China. And there's another, geopolitical reality. Then nobody's going to do that to U.S. vessels because we aren't even a superpower. We are a hyperpower. We have 12 nuclear aircraft carriers. You know as well as anyone the number of submersibles we have. The idea that some podunk dictatorship is going to use kinetic force against our vessels, woe betide them, because if they even consider it, we will come down on them like the hammers of hell.
And has anyone expressed, like a country made any threat that's a sort of in the not necessarily the ally world, but North Korea, China? Are you worried about any of them using this as the justification for going after U.S. assets, and not just Navy warships, but a civilian or a maritime vessel, a merchant vessel, using that as the justification, saying, "Oh, well, we thought there was something on board"?
Not in the slightest, especially after the incredible success of our operation against the Houthis, who were endangering U.S. vessels. We saw what happened to them. They basically surrendered. And also, just look, you're a military man. Look at the might of, the Department of War and the Commander-in-Chief. I was in the SITROOM. I was in the Situation Room during Operation Midnight Hammer. How about that as a metric for a country not to mess with? The idea that we flew strategic bombers from mainland United States all the way into Iranian airspace, dropped 34,000 pound bombs on their nuclear facilities, exited Iranian airspace without even a lawn dart being launched against our bombers, tells you that you'd have to be suicidal to take on President Trump, the U.S. military, and the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth.
All true. I want to move south in our country a little to what happened in Charlottesville. Absolutely tragic. This Ukrainian woman being killed, murdered, attacked by this guy that was out over and over and over again. You tweeted about it. I think, Seb, I refuse to use the phrase cashless bail. That's a left-wing made up word. If you don't have bail, it's no bail. It's not cashless. And I think that the Democrats, I don't mean to make this woman's death political, but the idea that the North Carolina governor is using it as an excuse to pass his budget and suddenly claim that he's pro-law enforcement is an absolute despicable display of political cowardice on the governor's behalf.
Yeah, and he was rightly lambasted for that tweet that he posted after the murder of this beautiful refugee from a war zone, where he said, "Oh, well, this is why you have to support me and my budget so we can have more police." Right. This governor is suddenly pro-police. You could have 10 million police officers in North Carolina, but if you release a career criminal 14 times in a row after he's been arrested, doesn't matter how many police you have, it is the left-wing judges, the prosecutors that facilitated the death of this beautiful young woman. Let me say it again. It is the left-wing judges, that magistrate, that words fail me when I look at the curriculum vitae of this magistrate that released this individual. That woman, I wouldn't trust her to make me a grande cappuccino, let alone run a court. It is the left-wing magistrates, judges, and prosecutors who are responsible for the death of that beautiful woman. In your purview at the National Security Council, are you concerned? I mean, this is when you talk about counterterrorism, I think you probably think of like big things, gangs, foreign terrorist organizations. And yet here in our own country, we are releasing people who are known criminals over and over and over again. And the media says, "Oh, he was mental health issues." He's a criminal released over and over and over again. And the media wants to excuse this. How hard does this make your job, though? Because you're trying to think of like big threats that are coming into this country. And yet we basically have to think of who are the people that the Democrats are letting out that we have to worry about now, not the organizations, just the nut jobs. Yeah, great question. So I was coming out of the Eisenhower Executive Building very early on in the administration, and I bumped into Elon Musk because he used to use the Secretary of War suite, which is the most beautiful part of the EEOB. And he recognized me as the terrorism guy. And Elon said, "So what's the biggest threat, Mr. Terrorism guy, to America?" And I said, we're going to deal with the jihadis, we'll deal with ISIS and Al Qaeda. The biggest threat right now is 4 years of open borders under Biden and Harris, with at least 12 million people coming into the country we know nothing about. For your viewers who aren't familiar, your taxpayer dollars were used to fund an app called CBP One, which any human being in the world who wasn't American could pre-clear themselves and say, "Hi, I'm a refugee." They were given a clearance number. They crossed the border into America, waived their clearance number from the Biden administration, from Alejandro Mayorkas, and were let into the country, given $5,000, an Obama phone, a free phone paid for by you and me, and asked which city would they like an airplane ticket to. That's the primary threat. Millions of Americans led into this country we know nothing about, who pre-cleared themselves with no background investigation and no interrogation. Then I added to Elon, I said, "But relax, don't worry, because we've got the best people on the case. We have an amazing division of labor. I handle basically the global jihadi threat around the world. That's my job as Senior Director for Counterterrorism in the National Security Council. But then, don't forget, we've got that force of nature, that man who will not be stopped, Stephen Miller, as the Homeland Security Advisor, along with Governor Noem at DHS. And then, and this is the one I mentioned to Elon, I said, and don't forget, Tom Homan, he's going to find all of the bad guys and get rid of them." And across the West Executive Boulevard, as we're walking into the West Wing, Elon shouts at me and says, "Yeah, Homan, he's straight out of Central Casting." So yes, it's very, very serious, but we have the best people on the case. And look at this. We are month 8 of the administration, 1.6 million deportations, a large chunk of them self-deportations. People who say, "I'm not going to mess with Tom Homan. I'm not waiting for Governor Noem to come get me, or Stephen Miller. I want to leave right now." 1.6 million. That tells you we are getting the job done for President Trump and for the American people.
Yeah, well, if you file, you get to leave on your own terms. If you don't, otherwise you end up getting shipped to who knows where. But you mentioned
and you never get to come back ever again.
Right. That's true. You mentioned Homan. He launched this Operation Midway. Again, what I don't think is ever really fully discussed or appreciated is your role in what we're trying to do, which is to get bad people out of this country that came in under the open borders. When you look at these cities, how concerned should we be about the number of people that came in this country during the 4 years of the Biden administration that pose a direct threat to our safety?
Well, just use common sense. I see the second Trump administration as, I've labeled it already as the revenge of common sense. Everything we do is just driven by facts and common sense. Whether you say a man shouldn't be allowed to go into a girl's locker room, or whether you say a nation needs borders, these aren't ideological. They're not even political statements. They're statements of fact and common sense. So let's apply common sense to this question of how much of a threat could there be. In the U.S. military for about a decade now, we've had the function of red teaming. Next to a combatant commander, there will be somebody whose MOS, whose specialty is to be the red team officer. They are tasked to think like the bad guy. So if you're in CENTCOM, you're supposed to think like Al Qaeda or ISIS. If you're in PACOM, you're supposed to think like the People's Republic of China. Let's red cell this for a second. When the Biden administration says, "Walls are bad, anybody can come in, download CBP One and we'll let you into the country," what does Al Qaeda think? What do the cartels think? What do North Korean intelligence officers think? If you're a bad guy and you know your number one enemy has literally no control over its borders, you're going to flood the zones with your assets, pretending to be refugees. So yes, the threat is real, but we are dealing with it every single day.
The last thing I want to ask you about, and it's amazing that it happened and we don't hear about it is this tragedy in Minnesota.
Yeah.
This disturbed individual goes in, kills people. And I saw an epic exchange with you and one of the media personalities on CNN. And it just reminded me that it's, to your point, your job, and I don't mean to tell you what your job is, but I feel like is to just find out what the threats are facing this country and then go address them. Right. And we won't talk about what happened in Minnesota because it doesn't fit the narrative. And it was funny because you came in and I thought it's funny. I told you this to your face, so I'll tell everyone. Like every time I see the lineup of who's on what shows, I was like, Seb Gorka, CNN. That is not what's going on with Dr. Gorka. And then I stopped myself and I go, all right, Sean, it's like Lucy with the football. Don't get fooled. You're going to want to watch this interview. And you come in and CNN's got all their stats and statistics. And you said, pardon me if I don't take your CNN statistic. But why can't we have a discussion about what's really going on, the threats that we face? These issues, we saw it in Nashville. We see it now in Minnesota. I know that you came with a lot of other statistics to talk about it. We're the drugs that these kids are on, the mental challenges that we have, and yet we're not allowed to have it because you can't discuss transgender. That's not supposed to be a fair topic. Why? I mean, you don't get to decide what the threats are. The president has tasked you with saying, what challenges do we face and how do we meet them head on? You don't go, Mr. President, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about this. How do we get to a point beyond what you do to acknowledge the real threats and challenges that the country faces?
Look, we've had this discussion. I think 3 years ago we had this discussion privately, Sean, where we said, why do we even pay any attention to the mainstream media? Because they're just not journalists. They are not journalists. Brianna Keeler, who interviewed me, Jake Tapper, who doesn't invite me back because the last time it was just too embarrassing for him. Anderson Cooper, the Washington Post, the New York Times. These are not journalists. They're hacks, but worse than that, they're propagandists. They have a narrative. They must push the narrative. President Trump is bad. MS-13 fathers from Maryland are good. Stopping the crime in DC with the National Guard is fascism, and the gangbangers should not be deported to Venezuela. I mean, this is the narrative. And let me just, what happened in Minneapolis, and I say this as somebody who's been studying jihadism for a quarter of a century and now gets to run counterterrorism for the most consequential president of the modern age. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm saying it because you're right. My job is not to distort facts. It's to analyze the threat and deal with the threat. And yes, global jihadism is my primary concern outside of the country. But Sean, when was the last time a Catholic church service with little girls and boys in the pews, when was the last time that was shot up by a member of Al-Qaeda?
Yeah. No.
I mean, think about Nashville, the transgender killer at the Christian school. Think about Minneapolis and Annunciation, and you're going, hang on a second, we've had half a dozen mass murders by people who were at least confused about their gender. And none of them were shouting Allahu Akbar. They were recording videos of Jesus Christ's face on a target. They were saying it's time to kill the Christians. That is the wake-up call that we need to deal with. We'll deal with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas in the Middle East or in Africa. But who's shooting up the churches in America? It's been a long time since a jihadi did something, if ever, against a Catholic school mass. I don't decide those facts. That man who thought he was a woman actually made that a horrific reality. And that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you dealing with it. And I appreciate you being straight with us. Because again, why bother if we're not going to actually talk about the real threats that we face? So that we
you can't cure a sick person if you misdiagnose them. If a guy comes into you with a brain tumor and you say, here, you've got a headache, take an aspirin. What happens to the patient? Our first responsibility is to speak truthfully about the problem we are facing. Otherwise, we will never, ever heal it.
I agree. Dr. Gorka, thanks for everything you're doing. You continue to serve. I appreciate it. Always good to bump into you over there. And I'll see you soon.
God bless. Thank you, Sean. And God bless all your viewers.
Thank you. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.